Africa's Trade and Industry Minister Rob Davies has come to the rescue of South Africa's poultry industry by significantly increasing the import tariffs on 5 categories of imported chicken. Now, Nicola Taron, who's the MD of Econex, joins us now for more from Cape Town. Nicola, thank you so much for your time today. But looking at the proposed increase in chicken imports there, is this the right step to do? Or maybe my question to you is it enough? Shouldn't we be doing a lot more to protect our local chicken industry?
Yes, well, I think this also speaks to some of the points that were mentioned earlier by Cookie in terms of productivity and the way that you compete in a global environment. We actually see these tariffs as a permanent industrial policy measure, which might in the long term not be the best way to increase competitiveness and productivity in the overall economy. It's definitely moving towards protectionism, which we didn't think is a correct industrial policy measure.
Nicola, you say it's not good for the long term, so in your opinion, what could be right for maybe the long term?
Yes, I think if one takes a step back and you look at the poultry industry, the problem is not on the demand side. We know that demand has been outstripping supply since 1994. We know that it's a cheap source of protein. The bottom 10% in terms of income spend around 15% of their household income on chicken, on white meat. And the problem, therefore, is that what you want the sector to be competitive on the supply side. So if you look at what the Poultry Association talks about, they talk about high input costs, such as maize cost. They talk about labor productivity, which we know is a problem, high wages, long distance from the markets. But the issue is that those things can be addressed through various other policy measures, which won't have such a direct impact on the price as we will see emanating from tariffs across the board.
So it's a very blunt instrument, Nicola, that government has used in this regard.
Exactly. So if one thinks about policy instruments that ITAC or the DTI have access to, then for instance a dumping duty would be a much more targeted instrument where you say this is the specific injury, this is the way I'm going to address this, and it will be there for a specific period of time until I have a chance to review this. On the other hand, a tariff is a change in terms of industrial policy. It's a permanent feature of the market, and these aren't small tariff increases. They range between 37% and 82%, which are large. And if one thinks about our commitments in terms of the WTO membership that we have, and you think about global trade and countries reducing their tariffs, then this is definitely moving in the opposite direction, which I think one should be concerned about.
Nicola, you mentioned there a 30+ odd percentage increase in the import tariffs. No doubt for South African consumers, chicken is their #1 source of protein. Could we see this increase flowing through to the consumers' pockets?
Yes. I think there's a definite anticipation, even from government side, from ITAC, that shows that an increase in the price will definitely flow through to the poorer consumers. The problem is one has to probably think about demand elasticity, but we know that chicken as a cheap source of protein does not have many alternatives. So the poorer population can hardly substitute away to fish, which is more expensive, or beef, or other sources of protein. And I think the important point to make there is that the Poultry Association in their submissions placed a lot of emphasis on the whole issue of food security. But the problem is that if you bring people protein at higher prices because of import tariffs, then that also has an impact on food security in terms of their access to cheap protein.
How did they get it right? You've done an enormous amount of research, as you always do at Econex, into the areas that you tackle. How did the lobbyists get Rob Davies to buy their story?
Well, I think it is part of a movement which we see, certainly from EDD and from DTI, in terms of a more developmental role for the state in the economy. So I think Koki Koima also referred to the iron ore, for instance, the kind of idea that we want a developmental steel price. So I think in terms of convincing the minister and ITAC that this industry needs protection, it fitted into, or it fell on ground that was already ploughed and was receptive to these kind of arguments. And in terms of implementing developmental policies, there's certainly a role for that, and we've seen that very successfully, for instance, in the Southeast Asian states. But the question is whether South Africa needs that kind of intervention, and what will happen to capital inflows and investment in this country if you get your intervention wrong.
Nicola, how do we, or are there proposed solutions then rather, to ensure that our local chicken producers or poultry producers like Astral and a company formerly known as Rainbow Chickens, how can we ensure that those kind of business operations are still viable and attractive?
Yes, so of options that one can use. The one is to say, well, let's leave it to the market. There is a demand, we have imports. If we don't have import tariffs, have to respond to that. It's not as if they don't have a market for their produce, but you can have more targeted measures. Certainly on the labour front, we need intervention there, or we need a freer labour market. In terms of input costs, there are various measures that one can take there. But I think in general what you want to do is you want to create a fair and competitive economy that will deliver or they'll give the chance to the producers then to produce at the lowest cost. And I think that's a different area where we need all sorts of government policy to be coordinated in order to provide this environment where the cost of doing business is fair, and where there's no specific intervention at specific levels that actually increases the cost for some specific interest sectors.
So increasingly we're starting to see the impact of this developmental state philosophy, and the poultry tariffs are one of them.
We would see it as part of that. The poultry sector has a very long, very specific history. We've had dumping duties, for instance, in the past. We also had a recommendation a while ago for new duties that was actually not accepted by the minister. But certainly in terms of these import tariffs, we would see it as part of a strategy which we see coming more and more from EDD and DTI in terms of a developmental industrial policy and trade policy.
Nicola, with the recent introduction of these import tariffs, would you say maybe that there's a lesson to be learned here for other industries, in particular with regard to our import regulations?
Well, I hope the lesson is not that lobbying is successful. I think the lesson is here that one really has to think very carefully about the impact across the economy. I don't want to bring in too many other examples, but we've just seen the export restrictions also on scrap metal, for instance, which is supposed to go into developmental steel price. So I think the lesson really here is that one needs to present proper research to government on overall economic impact for there to be a good or the best decision to be taken. And certainly if you want to intervene, at least you should choose measures that are temporary and not permanently change the landscape of competitiveness.